Afternoon. Thank you for joining us today, where we will be talking about the future of cyber protection, especially focusing on mobile application. We'll dive in how your app is protected against the most common malware features today. And in details, we'll run through a bit of setting the scene together with one of our technicians from Trifork. We'll dive a bit into something called Pegasus, a case we have for you. And then lastly, we'll dive into how to make apps self-protecting with our partner from Promon, represented by Morten. And lastly, we'll take a Q&A. And just to set the scene a bit, as you know, Trifork is empowering you across the entire cyber attack lifecycle. So this means that before, during, and after an attack, we are able to support you and help you across your business. And especially targeting today, we'll help you dive a bit into the protect stage here. And without further ado, I will leave it up to Asker to take over.
Thank you. And let's see if I can get my screen sharing to work. I believe you can see my screen now. Great. So yeah, thank you, Anders. I'll just dive into the current threat landscape. First off, it's hard to talk about cybersecurity currently without talking about state-sponsored actors. So we'll start off there and then we'll dive a bit deeper. So the last year or so, we have seen state-sponsored actors become more resourceful than ever. We've seen an explosion of utilization of what we call zero-day exploits. That's vulnerabilities that haven't been seen in the wild before. We've also seen a new law in China that requires vendors to report 0 days and critical vulnerabilities to the government, so they'll have a first hands-on in utilizing these against the enemies of China. We've of course also seen this armed conflict in Ukraine, where we'll have to consider a kind of hybrid state-sponsored and hacktivist activity like the IT Army of Ukraine. They managed to attack websites of several Russian organizations, like the state-owned Sberbank. They have hacked the Wagner Group and stolen data from them. So that's a new kind of threat we are up against in the cybersecurity world. So along with these hacktivists, we've seen a enormous rise in what I call cyber activists. That's what they primarily focus on is doing what we call open source intelligence. So they are playing hide and seek with photos from the members of the Russian army and Google Maps. So when they post a picture to a social media, they'll dive into where that picture is taken and find an exact location of a munition depot or something like that, and helping, of course, both sides of this conflict. And of course, also spreading enormous amounts of misinformation, unfortunately. Cool. So that's the state-sponsored part. We've seen a rise in hackers for hire, of course. That's been more and more commercialized, where they feature what actually look a lot like a normal business, where they have a CEO and they employ a lot of technical staff. They have human resources, just like a normal business, because apparently hackers for hire is a rising business. And the last thing I want to mention on this slide is the rise of a ransomware breach have declined slightly over the past year, according to IBM, but the frequency of ransomware breaches has increased. And personally, I attribute this to the hackers for hire part, where we see a explosion in credentials for sale. So it's a lot easier for attackers, ransomware gangs, to just purchase valid credentials, and that way gain access to a corporation and hit them with ransomware. According to CrowdStrike, they believe that 80% of the major ransomware attacks over the last year has been due to known credentials, because somebody has stolen credentials or brute forced access prior. Cool. So diving a bit deeper into the ransomware part and the malware in general, we see malware on rise again. Again, speaking a bit into the part that malware and ransomware is a business. We saw a decline when COVID hit, because people had to shut down and work from home, and then a slight rise here again in 2020 and 2021. We've seen a rise. Yeah, so this is, yeah, great. The ransomware that we see today is not the same that we saw a couple of years ago. It's the same that hit the Maersk and 7-Eleven. That's old school, the old way of doing ransomware. The new and more modern way of doing ransomware is to exfiltrate data from a company. So let's say we find the most sensitive business information. That's what is making your business unique. That might be the source code for your application. It might be the schematics for a certain PCB. Whatever it is, the attackers will find it and then exfiltrate it to their servers, and then tell you, we have this data. Here's proof we have your data. If you don't pay us money, then we'll just leak it to the internet or to your competition or whatever. So the traditional protections against ransomware, where we just say, okay, we have backup, so we'll be able to restore within one day, it's not working anymore. So that's a new evolution of ransomware and the extortion techniques. So where we earlier just had to make sure we have a valid backup and we know how to recover that backup, now we also have to focus on data exfiltration. So that's the threat against data. Cool. I hope that sets some part of the landscape. Now we'll dig a bit into the Pegasus case, as Anders mentioned. Of course, if you have any questions, just let me know and I'll answer them on the fly. Otherwise, we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So the Pegasus case, in case you're not familiar with what Pegasus is, Pegasus is used to target terrorists. That's the main commercial point of Pegasus, but it's also used to target journalists and human rights activists and politicians, and basically everyone with a smartphone. So this is the known targets of Pegasus, grouped by country in alphabetical order, somewhat. And this is the known users of Pegasus, at least who we know own Pegasus, this piece of software. It's only sold to governments and secret services, government agencies. So what is Pegasus? Now we know who uses it, who owns it, and the targets. It's a best-in-class technology to help government agencies detect and prevent terrorism and crime. But what we see Pegasus is a very, very powerful spyware developed by an Israeli group called the LSO group. And it's not just an everyday trivial keylogger. It's very powerful, very sophisticated, and it requires an export license from the Israeli Ministry of Defense, just as if it was a weapon. It's only sold to governments and government agencies with the intention to detect and prevent terrorism. But unfortunately, a report from Amnesty International reports that Pegasus is being widely used against high-profile targets, such such as journalists and human rights activists. So it's not just traditional bad guys, but yeah, that's a whole other discussion. So let's dig into how Pegasus works and how we first observed it. And when I say we, I don't mean Trifork as a group or me. I was not unfortunately part of it, but a group called the Citizen Lab in, I believe they're based in Toronto. They first observed this Pegasus hack when a human rights activist called Ahmed Mansour, based out of the UAE, received a text message with a malicious link, and he was curious, why did I receive this? It was regarding some kind of prison human rights. That's one of his key interests of areas of interest. So instead of just deleting this message or ignoring it, he was curious and contacted Citizen Labs. And as the name implies, they have a lab set up where they can detonate this malware in a safe environment and observe what it does. So they set it up, connected a clean iPhone from one of the researchers. He told his girlfriend, I need your phone. You'll get it back maybe someday. And wiped it clean and detonated this phishing link on it. Before they detonated it, they of course intercepted all connections to and from the device so they can inspect exactly what's going on. And they set up cameras to look down on the screen if in case anything popped up. So they detonated it, and it opened a browser, as you expect when you open a link, and not much happened. The phone stalled for a few seconds and then just crashed the browser and returned back to normal. So that was not very interesting. What was interesting was what's happening beneath. They discovered not only one, but 3 separate 0 days that was changed together to gain what we call root access on the phone. And when you are root access, then you have complete control. So this was the first time, at least to my knowledge, that Pegasus was observed in the wild. And by chaining these 3 exploits together, just by sending a text message with a link and the user opening it, they were able to read text messages, emails, record the camera, operate the microphone, gain location access, basically whatever a phone can do, they were able to do it because they had the main access to the phone. So after this team discovered this information, they released it to Apple. And Apple, of course, did a good job of patching it as soon as possible. So that's, from my point of view, a good ending to this part of the story. At least Apple patched it, acknowledged it, and patched it immediately. Just to try and understand how advanced this is, a similar chain of exploits was sold in 2015 for $1 million. So blowing 3 0 days like this is not cheap. It's not cheap in research, and if you have to buy it off a marketplace, that's even more expensive. So they really apparently wanted to get a hold of this guy and wanted to know where he is, record his microphone, everything. But that being said, that this might seem irrelevant now because all of these 0 days are patched. So as long as you have a updated phone, then you're good. That's unfortunately not the case. Pegasus is not just these 3 exploits, it's the framework behind it and the infrastructure to utilize these exploits and compromise targets just by knowing their phone number, basically. So the latest observation, let's say, of Pegasus deploys using a 0-click. So Pegasus is installed without any interaction from the user or the owner of the phone. So this is a lot more scary than having to click a link. We all get these phishing SMS text messages all the time. Come and collect your parcel, it's ready for delivery, and some link to a German website that has been compromised. I guess a lot of people know these by now, and we pretty much just ignore them. But these are just, when you go into the zero click that doesn't require any interaction, that's when it gets really scary. And the from a human rights perspective, the worst part is this is considered a lawful intercept, just like an old school wiretap. So there's not really a lot you can do from a legal standpoint to protect yourself and say that is illegal. If they have the means to do it, then it's all right. So even here in Denmark, we are afraid of Pegasus. So the Danish government recently purchased a tool to detect Pegasus and tools like it, to detect this running out on the Danish member of parliament and parliament staff. And of course, we also already use a variant of Pegasus in the Danish police as well, a tool developed by the Italian company called Hacking Team. So how do we prevent spying from foreign or local entities on our devices? That's the old Trifork logo. We changed the world with software. So we have to develop better software and more secure apps. So at least even if my phone is compromised, then my app is still secure. And some famous last words before handing the word over to Morten from Promon. This is from a report from the EU. The growing need for more software solutions provides a bigger surface and more opportunities for research and exploiting vulnerabilities. So yeah, the more software we develop, the more vulnerabilities we also develop, unfortunately. So yeah, that's it for my part of this webinar. Did we get any questions? Nope.
Yeah.
Guess it's over to you, Morten.
Thank you, Oscar. Let's see if I can get this to work. So, jumping on to Oscar's topic here about securing applications. So I'll be talking about application shielding. And to start off, I saw the hype the other day about ChatGPT, so I asked it, what is application shielding? And the AI bot is pretty spot on. It's a security technique or a solution or a set of solutions used to protect software applications from tampering and reverse engineering. That's basically the main part of shielding. It's to ensure that there is no unauthorized access to the code, to sensitive information, or leakage of information from the usage of the application. That is ChatGPT's quote-unquote definition from an AI. So, as Oscar mentioned as well, so moving mobile and having applications out in the field does require strong security, does require a strong focus on security, as there are a lot of apps out there. Users spend 80% of the time on their smartphone using different apps. And most of the apps published include one or more security flaws. As Oscar mentioned as well, the operating system itself is far from secure enough. There are plenty of 0 days out there. On Android, I believe the numbers doubled from 2020 to 2021. Considering that Android is an open source project as well, I'm sure Apple has quite a few of them that we don't talk about. And we found, but research found through Secure Kaspersky and others, that more than 55,000 different banking trojans were found in the wild, just in Q2 this year. And some of this malware, all of this malware, they use different approaches, particularly on Android. Primarily, all of them use some form of UI attack, screen reader, some form of what's called accessibility services attack on Android, which the application then needs to protect against to ensure that information doesn't leak. And that's not only for banking, finance apps. It can be any application that handles any form of sensitive information on behalf of the user. So what's the main problem that shielding or application shielding solves? It's really tied into the need to raise the security bar. It ties into the OWASP recommendations. It ties into the not only protecting code obfuscation, but also ensuring the data in the application doesn't leak. And fundamentally, repackaging. Repackaging is a direct cause for Apple not supporting sideloading applications, or generally speaking, third-party app stores, or being tampered with and republished either on a different app store or on the dark web, which we've also seen. Promon did a security review this fall and found that 50% of the top 100 finance apps are vulnerable to repackaging. And repackaging basically means that you take an application from a store, you modify it, you reassign it, and it can still do its job without noticing that it's been tampered with. You, of course, also may need to protect encryption keys, and there are regulatory requirements in a lot of industries that require best effort or more than best effort security on the application. And finally, of course, the biggest problem app shielding solves is that in our world, the apps are run on devices used by humans. Humans are far from perfect. They click links, they install stuff, they get hacked, they get fraud as well. So as ChatGPT alluded to, what does app shielding provide? It definitely needs to provide a foundation for strong security at rest. Security at rest means when the application is not in use, this is the application code that is published and implemented by the developers, which may contain sensitive information, may contain IPR. And this should be protected using obfuscation as well as encryption when needed to protect against tampering, including, as I mentioned, having prevention of modifying the application in any way or form and continue to be used. It also needs to ensure that the security mechanisms of the shielding technology itself also is not tampered with, and also cannot be removed from the application. The first thing an attacker or adversary will do if, for example, you have root detection in your application, is try to identify the part of the code that has business logic or runtime logic around routing and modify it. For example, saying modifying the code statically to always give back a response, I'm not rooted, and repackage it. And of course, the shielding technology itself must be very difficult to understand and or analyze by an adversary. The other part of shielding, which is the one that may be most difficult to implement on your own, is the runtime protections, not just the static protections. Runtime protection is all about preventing tampering at runtime when the application is in use, preventing manipulation of the user interface, copying information, even interacting with it. We have seen in various parts of the world where there are repackaged and modified versions of TeamViewer and other remote desktop tools people install on their phone because they believe they need that for customer support access. And when they log out and shut down their phone or close their phone, the adversaries are actually able to access the device remotely using these modified remote desktop tools, log into their accounts without the user of the phone noticing, and performing actions such as transferring money. And all of these attacks typically are done through screen readers and keyloggers. They can be identified with debuggers to analyze the application. And the runtime protection should be automatic and preventive, meaning preventing it from happening, not just detecting it. This is particularly true when it comes to the concept of debuggers, since if the debuggers is in your code, it's a little bit late to notice because it would already have modified your code. Having said all of this, app shielding itself is not an antivirus. It doesn't protect the device. App shielding is to protect the application, regardless of the state of the device. So it's all about protecting your application, even if the device is compromised, to limit the dependencies of the platform security capabilities, such as the walled garden or sandbox approach, since if the device has been tampered with, be that routing or jailbroken, you can't really trust those mechanisms to work. At Promon, we look for anomalies more than just the normal superficial identifiers, such as file names. We do those as well, but looking for anomalies, meaning things that aren't what they should be, gives a much wider protection than what an antivirus would do. We're just typically looking for a blacklisted information, be that signatures or names. And the elements I mentioned boil down to having a holistic approach to application security. The one thing that many forget or ignore is the fact that most mobile applications today, they communicate with your backend. We may have strong firewalls, whether for application firewalls, you may have different backend security, but end users are accessing that from the mobile apps. So ensuring that you have the holistic application all the way to the edge to the application is important. Be that not only protecting application code address so that people can't easily find API keys and similar, and at runtime that they cannot modify what the application does, and thus bypassing the trusted channel the application has to your backend. So at Promon, our secret sauce is really, and I'll answer one of the questions here as well, the full automation we do with our products, meaning that our app shielding is a zero-code integration. It literally takes minutes to shield an application. It's done post-compile, meaning you can do that in any sort of CI/CD pipeline. We do that ourselves internally. And really minimizing or removing any trade-off you usually have to do between ease of use and level of security. Making things easy to use while still applying strong security is non-trivial, and where we do spend a lot of our time and effort. And with that approach, we also want to ensure that we keep the focus on the security. We do the research. We identified a couple of years ago and spent 1.5 years with Google before we were allowed to announce the vulnerability that we named Strandhog with Google. So they were at least able to try to patch it in newer versions of their operating system. And we will do that so that you can put your feet up, relax. We are here to protect your applications. To go through a little bit further the terminology as well, and why we focus both on the at-rest and runtime. So when application is published and downloaded to the device, you see the icons there. The icons refer to the application code that you published, that was downloaded and installed on the app. That code is interesting for an attacker, for reverse engineering, for repackaging. So of course you want to obfuscate that code to make it less easy to understand and follow. And for a lot of people that is sufficient, because that protects the application, but it doesn't protect the application on the device. It just protects the code in a manner that makes it more difficult to read. A pen tester or reverse engineer doesn't really need to read your code to understand it. He just looks at it, makes guesses based on experience, and is able to manipulate it anyway and understand what it does. Although obfuscation is a good starting point, it's not sufficient. And the main reason for that is that you can tamper with it if you don't have repackaging. So you can still modify the code without understanding the original class name or function name. There's no blocker for that. The other part is that when the application is executing on the device, it relies on many elements of the device, the operating system. Your application doesn't contain the frameworks for drawing windows. They're using the Android or iOS frameworks for doing that. It just contains the content. Since you're now loading code into the process which isn't yours, you are exposed to runtime attacks. You're also exposed to hooking frameworks, which are basically tools that are used to, at runtime, modify the way your application performs. Referring back to, as I mentioned before, repackaging, and by changing statically the result of root check, I can do that dynamically as well with a hooking framework. Basically, having my framework hook the function, and whenever it's called to do something, I can return the opposite or exactly what I want to return. Or I can inject code to modify it. Other elements of runtime is, of course, what type of device am I running on. A security-sensitive app should really not be executed in the wild on emulators. That's fine when you're developing an app and testing it, but you don't want it to happen in the world or in the wild, because emulators not being physical devices means that the adversary has full control of the device in memory. You can monitor everything. Debuggers I already mentioned, and of course then you have all the various verticals of attack for spyware, keyloggers, and so on, that the application generally isn't aware of, but a strong app shielding product must be. So a little bit about how we approach that. So obviously we protect your application code using both obfuscation and encryption. We have what we believe are most robust repackaging prevention out there. It has never been bypassed, meaning that none of our customers have had their applications modified and then allowed to execute them in the wild. The secret sauce, as I mentioned, is doing all this post-compile. Our tooling is such that we only need a working application to implement all the security on the application. That's all done fully automatically with tooling that we provide. And of course, we protect our own code, also with our own in-house obfuscation engine. That paired with part of what our integration tool does in encryption ensures that the security engine cannot be removed through bindings, where we basically remove information that the application needs during the integration process and encrypt them, and we will decrypt them and re-inject them into the process once we are happy with runtime. For example, we're not running on an emulator. if someone then tries to statically remove the security capabilities, this information is gone and application will not be able to run. I do see there are questions coming in, and I'll go through them at the end. The other part is the security runtime, where we don't only detect, we actually actively protect. By protecting the entire application environment, as well, we monitor the device settings without going outside of the allowances of Apple and Google respectively. As mentioned, we actively block debuggers. We don't just wait for them to attach and then react because it's already too late. Same thing with emulators. And rather than block lists for elements you want to approve, such as I mentioned, there are all, if not most, malware uses UI as one of their attack vectors. UI elements such as accessibility services on Android. But you would still typically be required to allow people with poor vision to utilize your application and have text-to-speech readout, which are using the same services. So for those elements, we use what we call approve lists, where you can approve certain application services to access the content of your application screen. Anything which is not on a list will not get access to the application by Shield. In addition to that, we also have our own white box script engine, which protects any keys that Promon Shield uses from being compromised or misused, because it's never exposed in memory itself. And we strive hard to be fully self-contained, meaning that we, to the extent that's programmatically feasible, are not depending on operating system itself or operating system function calls. We implement our own, which allows us to secure data even on compromised devices. Most apps do depend on common system functions. We do not. We also have SDKs for storing data in the application on the device. And these assets are protected with encryption keys. We don't statically, it doesn't never exist statically. They are always derived based on the entropy that we have access to on the device or at runtime, that are decrypting the assets and wiping the keys. And again, these SDKs and these elements are also, of course, applied using our integration tools, meaning that there's no security knowledge required. For any code integration that is supported, we do provide very easy to use APIs. I mentioned that we provide integration tools. So Shield itself is offered as a software development kit, where we have an integration tool, which, as I mentioned, can fit into a CI/CD pipeline, with Jenkins or whatever. You can integrate it into your IDE. It only requires a Java runtime to be used, and we have optional code integrations as well. We also have, of course, in addition to mobile, which I've been talking mostly about, Android and iOS, because they are really the biggest surface of use out there for most people. We also support, Windows and Mac OS to protect desktop applications as well. These are different platforms, so of course the solutions look slightly different, but the integration, the way it protects the application is tailored for the platform, meaning that we do things differently on Windows and on Mac OS. We also do different things on Android and iOS because the platform is different. But the way they are integrated and used and applied is as similar as feasible. So, and who's Promon? We are a Norwegian company headquartered in Oslo. So we're not too far away from Denmark. We are designing our products to protect the application, even if we can't trust the device. So the philosophy is really that any app, any device should be able to run securely, regardless of where it's run. And we've been in production now for more than 10 years. And have customers in more than 70 countries. And we do focus very heavily on the best security, best delivery. We do provide our solutions to be used on premise. There's no cloud involvement there, meaning there's no risk for the application to leak in transaction to us or from us. And to prove our value by being easy to use and applying the security so that there's no leakage. Moving on to the Q&A. The question about Apple being a walled garden and whether or not app shielding is relevant. It's a good one. Sorry?
Cool.
Anders? Oh.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So Apple is indeed a walled garden, as is Google, Android, if you don't root it. Apple, of course, doesn't believe in jailbreaks. They don't believe it exists. Or they don't acknowledge the fact that jailbreaks exist. They do. They still do. So from that point of view, it is relevant. It's very relevant to be aware from an application perspective, the relative security of the device you're running on. If the device is jailbroken, it's actually much worse than a rooted device, the way jailbreaks work, and it sort of ties into the name of the differences. Modern jailbreaks, they fully break the walled garden. They allow the jailbreak app stores to do things that Apple never wants you to do. We've seen many different ways of trying to modify application behavior on jailbroken devices. Generally speaking, if a device isn't rooted or isn't jailbroken, you can, to a large extent, trust the device. So in a perfect world where devices were secure, there wouldn't really be a need for having application security or network security or anything like that. Such a world doesn't exist. Our apps are used by users on their devices. The third question, app stores supposed to protect against malicious apps? Yes, they are. Are they achieving that? No, they're not. Particularly due to the same reason that you want to protect your code, or an app developer wants to protect their code through obfuscation and encryption, malware does the same. So the app stores can't necessarily analyze them easily to see what they do. And typically, malicious apps are simple, stupid apps with some logic and smartness to them. So typically, a malicious application on any platform would be a dropper app. Similar to what Oscar mentioned about the Pegasus malware, which is distributed outside of the app stores. They would have an app that, and that's commonly seen in malware, it checks where it's at, where it's running from. And if it's running in, for example, in a targeted country, it will then do its dropper functionality and download the malicious code. And it wouldn't do that in an app store performance review.
Cool.
The last one is
Thank
typical.
you. Thank you so much, Morten, for taking all the questions.
Oh yeah.
So just skipping a bit ahead to one final question here. I believe it's for Aske. Aske, I don't know if you've seen the query, but how do we, as the blue team, ensure to protect ourselves against the attacks on all our endpoints, be it mobile and laptops?
On mobile, I'll leave that to Morten, but at least on our laptops, I'll recommend at least having some modern EDR endpoint detection and response software running, whatever it might be. There's a lot of competition out there in that market space. So that's a great starting point, at least. If you know what's running on your device, then you'll know what's malicious and running on your device. And of course, being in control, doing the first two steps of the sys controls will be, at least in my book, a bare minimum to being in control of your hardware and software assets.
Absolutely.
And of course, a mobile device is also a hardware asset on the same level as a laptop, and then even bigger attack vector because we use our mobile phones a lot more in our daily lives than our laptops. We also use it when we get home and let our kids play games on them and watch YouTube, and suddenly they click a malicious link that just popped up because it was annoying. So it's a bigger attack vector, and we need to defend it, at least if not as good, even better than our laptops.
Yeah, fully concur. And at Trifork, we work across the entire attack lifecycle. We have some brilliant guys sitting on top of the detect lifecycle, doing 24-hour attack monitoring, ensuring that all your attack vectors are monitored. We do GRC, we do implementation of protect lifecycle, the whole lot, and staying a bit at the app shielding. One thing is to talk about all the good theory behind it. Another thing is seeing is believing, right? So here at Trifork, we would like to offer the opportunity to get a hands-on demo, seeing how everything works, and taking it from there. So unless there's any more questions, I do believe that's what we will have time for today. I thank you so much for taking time for us. And this recording will, of course, be uploaded to trifork.com, so it can be viewed afterwards. Thank you so much.